On a chilly night of the year 2012, an orgy of savagery and barbarism takes place in the heart of the nation's capital, that finally ends in the extinguishing of a life, brimming with the joy of being alive, and the promise of a bright future. On the morning after that night of unfathomable cruelty, there is vengeance in every heart, and blood in every eye. And cries of tougher laws, more stringent punishments, and quick delivery of justice, begin to pierce the skies far and wide. The blazing desire to demand retribution will calm down only when it is quenched with the blood of the beasts who perpetrated this monstrosity. The society, the administration, and the judiciary, all, will take part in the process of delivering to those responsible the true fruits of their heinous actions, and bring the delivery of justice to its logical conclusion. But, is this truly the whole truth, and a just resolution? In any civilized society, when a crime takes place, two things need to happen. First, institutions, such as the police, victim support services, and the judicial system, should spring to the help of the victims, and others around them affected, to deal with, and overcome the tragedy. And second, to set in motion processes, which get to the bottom of what happened, the reasons and circumstances that led to it, and, to bring about changes, in the society and systems, that would ensure that such a thing never happens again. If we examine the second, in the context of the horrific 2012 gang rape case, then we will be able to apportion the causes, and thus understand the incident in its completeness. If we go through the series of reasons that led to the gruesome incident, the first, and the most immediate reason, responsible for the victims falling into the clutches of the perpetrators, was the fact that victims and her friend, in the country's capital, were forced to hitchhike, in a private bus, late in the night, instead of a safe public transport, on account of the failure of Delhi's public transport system then, which could not provide a reliable and safe means of public travel at night, forcing them to accept to travel in a private bus, full of dubious characters, and no other passengers. The next vital reason was the low level of efficacy and confidence of the public in the law and order machinery. The perpetrators of the gruesome gang rape, before committing this barbaric act, had taken aboard another victim, robbed him, and dumped him on a roadside. If the Delhi police was effective, and had the confidence of the people, then the crime would have been reported, and criminals apprehended, immediately after the first crime, instead of being emboldened, and looking for another victim. After these systemic causes, we come to the perpetrators, and their mindset, who, on their free will, chose to show cruelty that would put to shame even the most cruelest of animals. However, as we are a part of a civilized society, and for an appearance of being just, we have the responsibility to conduct a hearing into the circumstances that led to them behaving in such a barbarous way, that fateful night. The first, and the most decisive factor, is a product of the section of society from which they come. In that world, when, at an impressionable age, they see other children of their own age, find nurturing love, and enjoy the pleasures and comforts, which are beyond their reach, even by the farthest stretch of imagination, and instead, someone is forced to become a waiter, a laborer or a truck cleaner, and each day of their lives becomes an incessant struggle to survive in a cruel world of grown-ups, without any protection or support. In such an environment, concepts like empathy and equality become meaningless. The next big role is played by the values they grow under the influence of, which determines the status of men and women in our society. In our culture, and especially the part of society from which they come, the position of women in homes, and in the larger society, and the rampant and deep-rooted patriarchy, frames their attitude towards women. It would be a big mistake to assume that this diseased mindset is restricted to a particular segment or class of our society. These people are a product of a society where politicians and ones near them are constantly reported to be engaged in violence and exploitation against women, and a large section of people defends them. Where leaders with mass following trivialize rape and align with the rapists, where socially dominant caste and village councils forgive and sometimes patronize rape to the extent that rape victims and their families are punished instead of the rapist. Where representation of women in judiciary faces strong resistance, and the attitude in the highest echelons of the judiciary is not just unsupportive, but alarmingly anti-women. Where men of God, with wide following, and educational institutions, who should be forward-looking, constantly show deep-rooted prejudice towards women. Where the outrage towards incidences of rape is selective, depending on the caste, or the religious community, from which victims or the end rapists come from. Where equal to mass of people who demand retribution against rapists, is the group of people who blame the victim herself. It is then that we can see the deep roots of this tragedy, and the social disorder that lies beneath it. But, a society's character is most clearly represented in its most influential cultural expression. In India, this position of pride is occupied by the visual media. In this sprawling country populated by masses who have few resources and very little education, there is a two-way relationship between media, like the cinema, and the society. While on one hand, the deep-rooted misogyny and patriarchy depicted in the movies come from the society, on the other hand, they have a profound effect on the attitudes and behavior of a large number of people. A recurring theme in Indian cinema is one where the boy forcefully and relentlessly pursues the girl, and even goes on to abduct and abuse her. All of this is considered part of the process of wooing the girl. The behavior is not only encouraged by young and the old around the victim, but is eventually received positively, even by the victim of this violent harassment. Imagery and situations, ranging from comical objectification to disturbing forms of male superiority and female subjugation, are common in the cinema, from all regions of the country. The most popular television programs in modern India have been those in which traditional, regressive and subservient qualities of women are glorified and served to the masses, who cannot have enough of it. When in the mainstream society, there exists no desire or mechanisms for disapproving this narrative, and instead there is an environment which says that this behavior is acceptable, and that a man's dominance over woman is an eternal truth, then there should be no surprise that India, which is the world's largest consumer of cinema, is also the most dangerous country for women in the whole world. This problem of our society is so intimately identified as endemic to our culture by the world today, that when in the year 2015 in Australia, an Indian male was charged for stalking and harassing two women, repeatedly calling and texting them, and calling himself their boyfriend, the defense argued that this was a behavior imbibed from Indian films, saying that the accused believed that this manly behavior made women fall for the man. What was surprising was not the fact that the defense used this argument, but the fact that a judge accepted this and let off the man, saying that this behavior was a minor and common thing in the Indian context. When other nations have to specifically issue travel advisories for their women coming to India, to pay special attention to their safety, then it becomes clear that the situation is certainly not normal. When, to the volatile heap of gunpowder, created by a combination of inability of the government to fulfill its responsibility to provide the most basic of civic services and security, and a mentality fashioned under the influence of their deprived economic and social status, and regressive gender stereotypes in society. An igniting spark is added by liquor, bad company, and an opportunity to commit a crime, then the chances of happening of the beastly and gruesome events, like the one that happened on that fateful night, do not seem so improbable. Today, when the modern women have refused to conform to this image, and play along with this male fantasy any further, but has resolved to not accept this state of affairs, and resist with all their might, a further dimension is added to the crime of rape. The thing that sets this case apart from other cases of gang rape is the extent of brutality wrought upon the victim by the perpetrators. When their prey, instead of remaining a helpless victim, fiercely opposed and retaliated, demonstrating indomitable courage and fearlessness, then the toxic sense of masculinity, the impotent rage, born out of their social and economic wretchedness, the intoxication of alcohol, and the unexpected ferocity of the victim's retaliation, gave birth to an all-consuming explosion of rage and savagery, that ended in a crime of such violent barbarity, the memory of which makes people's hair stand on end even after all these years. When the perpetrators of any such crime of passion are in the process of committing the act, they are not acting as rational human beings guided by reason, they are neither capable of taking into consideration any judicial provision, or contemplate about the consequences of that heinous crime under the law. Because the brutality was not on account of any personal enmity, but was a cumulative effect of the social rot, gross systemic failure, and the alignment of circumstances and opportunity, with their own colossal failure at being normal, decent, human beings. In that moment of madness, their victim, for them, does not remain a fellow human being, but an embodiment of all that outrages them, and a target for venting out their frustrations and rage. When a crime is in progress, and the law enforcement, or anyone else, has an opportunity to stop it, or prevent the situation from getting worse, it is perfectly justified to go to any extent. Because, in such a situation, the interest and safety of the victim is the most important consideration. But after the crime has been committed, the circumstances are completely different. When we stop any persecution or wrongdoing, then this motivation, and any action arising from such a feeling, are pure. But later, when we respond to a criminal's actions with calls of vengeance, then we stand stripped of all those values and ideas that make us human beings. A series of researches and scientific analysis worldwide have conclusively proven that the use of capital punishment does not affect the occurrence of crime in future. What is more important to know, that in countries and states where capital punishment has been abolished, there is a significantly lower rate of violent crimes as compared to those which still have death sentence. There is a high correlation between violent crimes and social and economic deprivation. The highest rate of violent crime in the United States was during the Great Depression. If we respond to an act of violence by individuals, by institutionalizing revenge and death, as a society, in form of death penalty, then it will only lead to cruelty and retribution, becoming embedded in the culture of our society, and a perpetuation of the cycle of violence. We should recognize the fact that the state and administration are far more resourceful and powerful than any individual in the society. The state has the power of public resources, the capability to make laws, and the mechanisms to implement them. It is in the hands of the powerful, both the ability and the duty to show mercy. When the state stoops to the level of the perpetrators, by committing an act of violence in return, we as a society lose our moral ground to condemn violence. Aggression and anger are a part of the human animal nature, while empathy and compassion are traits that the human race has learned and cultivated, despite it being counterintuitive to our nature. This is one of the reasons which has made us tower above all other living beings, and reach the zenith of civilization. When the crowd turns into wolves, baying for an eye, the law and leaders, playing the role of the elderly in the family, have the responsibility to divert the masses away from rage, and towards rational thought and humanity. We have seen the importance of leadership shown by law and legislature, in driving public opinion and acceptance, in the case of treatment of juvenile criminals. When law showing leniency to the juvenile participant of the same crime, let him free so he could reform himself, it is an example of the important role of the leadership, the people at the helm of political, social, and legal systems, can play in driving the change towards a more benevolent society. But, on the other hand, when the majority of the people, and lawmakers in search of short-term populism, or for a lack of courage, join the cries, thirsty for blood, then no one can stop such a society from getting gored and wounded again and again. When once cruelty becomes acceptable in any society, then it continues to manifest itself in various forms, whether it is a violent rape, capital punishment, or mob violence and lynchings. When an attribute or mindset is condoned and imbibed by a society, then it becomes impossible to control when, and in what avatars, it will show up in the society. When those close to the victims lend their voices to the cacophony of screams demanding murder in the name of justice, they inadvertently give legitimacy to the culture of violence and intolerance, of which they themselves are a victim. By doing this, they allow themselves to be used by unscrupulous and self-serving elements, whose concerns for their personal tragedy lasts only as long as it has a potential to garner headlines and serve their interests. While in many countries, religion has consistently opposed this form of murder in the name of justice, in our society, religious leaders have conspicuously stayed away from this debate. Hatred and violence will continue to revisit a society where all the pillars of the society fail in their duty to lead its citizens away from violence and vengeance, and towards kindness, compassion, and forgiveness. If we use the execution of a few people to close the chapter on, and cover up our complicity and failure as a society and system in creating the environment for crimes like this, then we, as a nation, will forever be condemned to be stuck in this vicious cycle of personal violence, and its response, by way of violent revenge, by the system and society. It is in testing times like these that the character and culture of a nation and its people is put on trial. This is the time where we as a society and people can decide to take the direction that takes us from pain and anger to forgiveness and peace. Each moment that passes, we see around us people dying who do not deserve to die, while we can do nothing but watch helplessly. We, humans, do not have the ability to give life, but we do have a choice and a chance to not take one.